This video is going to take us to the halfway point, Yanni. We are finishing up the NFC with the NFC South tonight. Football season feels a little ways away yet, but hey, we must be making progress.
Scott Hansen, I think, posted 11 more Sundays, so
Nice.
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Not bad, not bad.
Yeah.
This is a good way to pass the time while we wait for it to happen. So,
No doubt.
well, let's jump into it, man. We're on the NFC South tonight, and we're going to start with the prohibitive favorite, which is the Atlanta Falcons. Raheem Morris coming in from the Rams as the head coach, first year, replacing what many would say was lackluster coaching last year for the Atlanta Falcons. Last year they were 7-10. Obviously, bringing in Kirk Cousins was a big offseason acquisition. And actually, I don't know if you have it pulled up. I forgot to get the win totals queued up here.
Yeah, little 9.5 juice to the over.
Boom. Yep. Exactly. I have minus 134, plus 120 to the under, and minus 115 to win the division. I have the Atlanta Falcons as not only having the easiest schedule in the league, but having the easiest schedule by a wide margin. If you screw around with standard deviations at all, I have them at minus 3.07 standard deviations. And once you pass 2, it's a lot. So over 3 is a lot. Yanni, the Falcons, I think, obviously from the lines, people are expecting them to win the South this year. What do you think?
I think you may have mentioned really the 3 most important things here: coaching, quarterback, and schedule. And all 3 obviously are potentially going to be better than they were a year ago. Coaching, I don't think there's any question, and I know we'll probably get to rank the coaches here at the end, but you mentioned it. I mean, this was a disastrous coaching staff. It really was. And, people like to poke it at different coaches and things, but I mean, it was all merited. It really was. And, then you look obviously at the quarterback position, and Desmond Ridder, he didn't work out. All right. I mean, he was a guy that I think they were hoping may step up and be that guy, and he wasn't. So what do? They bring in really the best free agent out there. And I think what we have to wonder is 2 things here. Number one, does Cousins still have that same kind of magic that he's had? Which I think the answer would probably be yes. The other question would be, is he going to be healthy coming off, a pretty major injury at a time when he's not a young guy anymore? So, I think that's the big question mark. But I've got to imagine he's a pocket passer, right? So does he need to be healthy? Yes, but it's not like he needs his legs to scramble and that kind of thing. So I think that he's going to be all right there. Everything's lined up for the Falcons. You mentioned the schedule, and you're right. I mean, all of these teams have a pretty easy schedule, and it's because they play each other. They not a lot of wins projected there and all that. But the Falcons, like you said, by a long shot, have the easiest schedule. So you look at them and you're saying, okay, they're potentially the best team in the division with the easiest schedule. What could go wrong? I'm just here to tell you this. There's something about this that I just don't like. It's just, there's no such thing as a trap line, but we always hear that term, trap line. And I think the Falcons are a little bit of that. And, you go back, if you go back the last 5 or 6 years, this team has not hit their win total. I think it's like 6 years that they haven't hit their preseason win total. Last year, they were one of the worst teams in the league against the spread, 5-12. So again, overvalued or underperforming, however you want to look at that there. So there's just something there that makes you say, I don't know. Now, on paper, this offense could be really, really good. It could. And it may be really good. We'll see. But I don't love the defense. They improved last year, and this is a defense that hasn't been good for the last handful of years. They did make a step forward last year, bringing in a guy like Jesse Bates, I think helped. They had a guy like Calais Campbell, which I think helped, no longer there. Right. I think this defense is going to regress a little bit, and I think it's going to be not necessarily great. They have some nice pieces, so don't get me wrong. You see a couple players on that defense, you're like, yeah, that guy's pretty good. That guy's pretty good. Overall, though, I don't love it. I kind of look at that and say, are they going to have enough pass rush there? Are they going to have those impact plays on defense that you need throughout the course of the year, even if the offense is good? So that's a long way of me saying that Should they probably win the division? Yeah, they probably should. Coach, quarterback, schedule. But I'm not buying them. I'm really not. There's really only one thing that they did in the offseason besides the addition of Kirk Cousins that I like, and that's the addition of Rondell Moore. I think he's an X factor potentially in this offense if they can get him worked in. I think he could kind of be that guy that's that, speed difference maker. He's not the running game. He's not the passing game. He's kind of in between there. So I do like that. I'm a Cousins guy. I'm a Cousins fan. But there's something about the history, and we've talked about this with a couple of the other teams, where are they going to have enough to truly be what they should be in this? And again, 9.5 wins doesn't seem like a lot when you look at the schedule, but I'm scared of it. So that's my initial take.
Yeah, I can't blame you. Well, all right, some things on the Falcons. First of all, Kirk Cousins. RIP Kirk Cousins as a Minnesota Viking. I was actually kind of glad they moved on. I think we're not here to talk about the Vikings, but I think the Vikings needed to move forward. His contract was just going to be so big, but I enjoyed having him there while he was there. And to your point, he's a good NFL quarterback. When you give him time to stand back there and throw the ball, he can absolutely pick you apart. And does he make some stupid mistakes? Yeah, he makes some stupid mistakes, though I would contend that a lot of his mistakes are when he's pressured and feels like he needs to push the ball into places where he probably shouldn't. So I think if he can just be a pocket passer who gets protected, man, I think he's, top tier in the NFL, actually, just standing back there and throwing the ball. So I'll miss the chains. I'll miss blowing the horn shirtless with his son and stuff, but I think he can certainly go to Atlanta and be successful. You talked about it, but man, I love this offense. They have a really good offensive line. They have really good skill position players. Now, the pass catchers aren't going to blow you away. I do think Drake London is set to have a big year this year. We talk about Matt Stafford being a kingmaker for wide receivers, and I'm not saying Cousins is in exactly that same category, but he can get the ball to a good receiver.
Yep.
And I think Drake London had to put up with bad quarterback play. So I'm looking forward to seeing what he can do if Cousins is healthy and able to play. Kyle Pitts, we've talked about all the potential that he has and maybe kind of falling short of that potential. But I heard someone say, and I hadn't realized this, I think he's 21 years old, or maybe he's 22 now.
22, I think.
Super young, right?
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of opportunity for him to still progress. He's got so many physical tools. So I'm not saying he's going to be amazing this year, but I also think we shouldn't be writing him off after the first few years he's had in the NFL. He's got a lot of potential. Bijan Robinson plus Tyler Algier, who's a good NFL running back behind this line. And that brings me to one of the things that I like for this offense the most is if they're able to run the ball behind that line, that opens up play action pass for Kirk Cousins, which when a defense has to respect the run and then they can go to play action pass, that's where he's deadly. Even with the Vikings, where they couldn't always get the run going, he had a passer rating over 103 in 4 of the last 5 years on play action. Like, he just can shred people if he gets that opportunity. And I think he'll get that opportunity here. So I'm pretty high on the offense. The biggest thing for me is, can Cousins stay healthy? Right. Like you said, he's older. Is he going to be all the way healed? I tried to look some stuff up, and it sounded like he was progressing on schedule. So it sounds okay, but we'll see. I mean, I don't think they want to have to go to Michael Penix. Not that it would necessarily be an utter disaster or anything, but it's an obvious big step down from Kirk Cousins. So as long as he stays healthy, I like this offense a lot. Now the defense. Man, I went into this thinking like, okay, I feel like the defense was kind of okay last year. They weren't really that okay. Like you said, they did take a step forward at some positions. But I think losing Calais Campbell is kind of a big deal because they don't have a lot of guys, period.
Yep.
This is a team that really has to hope that their draft picks can come through. And I don't think that that's ever a place you want to be. Now, you can argue like the names of the people that they took early on in this draft after Penix. I heard a lot of people do that. Personally, I mean, I don't know as much about the draft prospects as a lot of the analysts, but it seems like it's kind of a crapshoot and people turn out and don't, and you never really know. But They drafted Ruka Corojo, defensive tackle, Braylon Trice, edge from Washington, Brandon Dorius, defensive tackle from Oregon. That was their second, third, and fourth pick. So I like that they tried to shore up the defensive line there. I just don't know that I'd be pumped about having to depend on rookies to have it actually be shored up. So you said it. This defense has a couple pieces, but I think the defense is super sketchy. And I wouldn't feel good. This is the thing in the NFL where games are often close. You have half the teams in the league going up against that defense in the 2-minute drill to try to put a game away. I don't have much faith in them to put the game away.
Right.
And I think that's when you talked about being a little hesitant to go over 9.5 with them. Now, I have them winning 11 or even 12 games is where I have them. Mm-hmm. But man, for me, it's the defense specifically that scares me in terms of betting this team. The other thing here is just on the turnovers. I thought this was notable. They had a -12 turnover differential, and that goes to the quarterback play, right? They were 1.71 wins over expectation based on turnovers, even with that team they had last year. So I think there's a lot of opportunity here. We're going to progress through the other teams in this division who I'm probably not going to be overly high on. This, you talk about this a lot, especially early in the season. This is probably an over team. I don't know how many people they're going to stop, but I don't think there are many defenses that are going to be able to fully stop them either. Yeah. So I don't feel confident, though. If I had to bet it, I would bet the over. Like I said, I have them at 11 or 12 wins. One of the easiest. I'll have to go back and try to look historically, but it has to be one of the easiest schedules in years. Mm-hmm. So you have to like that, but man, that defense is tough. So. Anything here, Jan? Anything else on the team or any players or anything you're looking at?
So as always, when we do these, I try to find some overs on the player props because, as you know, we like to kind of key in on those unders. The guy that you mentioned, Drake London, I mean, his overs at 950.5 yardage. And I think by default, he ends up wide receiver 1 there with Cousins. It seems like they're going to have 1,000-yard receiver on that roster, right? Now, obviously, Kyle Pitts could take a chunk out of that. You talked about Bijan Robinson, but London, to me, if he's ever going to have 1,000-yard year, this is it. When you look at that, so I think you could look at that over. And the other thing too that I think is going to be different is, if you want to play a running back over, which is generally never a good idea, but if you want to do that, Bijan Robinson is right at 1,000. I have a feeling he, whether it was coaching, whether it was him being a rookie, whatever it was, I mean, we saw him flat out platooning last year. I mean, it was pretty much 50-50. He got a little bit more action towards the end of the year, but then they even scaled that back. I think this year he sees more work. I think it's more like a, 75-25 deal. And if that's the case, that offensive line, we talked about the weapons you have to account for there, that schedule. How does he not be 1,000-yard rusher in this league? I mean, it would be crazy for him not to if he plays a season healthy. So I think those are two guys, if you want to get wild and play some future player overs, which again, probably not going to make a living doing that, but if you want to do that, I think these are two that you could absolutely look at.
Yeah. The other one for me is, and I didn't look up a number, but would be Kyle Pitts, only if his number is depressed some because of his previous performance. I don't know if you saw a number on
his yardage, I think, was like 825 or 850, which, I look to because I feel like I wouldn't be surprised if Kyle Pitts has 1,000-yard year this year, but I think since he's come in the league, it's like, just like in fantasy football world, draft Kyle Pitts, and it never really gets there. Now, this could be the year for sure because he has that quarterback. But I think, with Pitts, I want to wait and see. I think London, to me, is the more sure thing. I mean, you kind of mentioned Matt Stafford, Kingmaker role there. I mean, I think you're right. I mean, by default, I feel like he's going to get 1,000 yards. I don't even know that he has to have a great year to go over on this.
Man, I actually really agree. I'm trying to be careful with my overs. It's easy to get excited about that, but I think if I'm going to play overs, one of the things I try to think about even is who could play 13 games, 14 games, and I still think if they're out half the season, sure, nobody's getting there, right? But could they be nicked up for a game or two and still make it? Drake London feels like one of those to me that could miss a couple games and still get there.
Yeah,
So.
and I don't. Just to add on that, they brought in Darnell Mooney. He'll probably be a pretty steady number 2 guy. I think Rondell Moore, the guy I mentioned, is kind of the gadget guy. It's not like they have a lot besides that. I mean, their bench is pretty thin. So I think London's going to get a lot of looks in that offense when they're throwing.
Yep, 100% agree. Yeah, they don't have a lot of depth for sure at the skill positions. All right, well, that is the favorites, the Atlanta Falcons. From the top, we go to the bottom. The Carolina Panthers, who bring in a new coach and Dave Canales coming in from Tampa Bay. Last year, 2-15 in Bryce Young's inaugural season. This year, we'll talk about it, I'm sure, but boy, did they turn over a whole bunch of the roster. This is, in many ways, a new team. I have their strength of schedule as 29th, so one of the more difficult schedules in the league. Their over-under is 5.5, minus 115 to the over. Last time I looked, you could get plus 115 to the under, so it was a little bit to the over. Plus 1,200 to win the division, Yanni. You going to throw a couple units on the Panthers to win the division here?
Absolutely not. Let's just mention. So first of all, I do have a little discrepancy on their schedule. I don't have it quite that difficult. I have it 18th.
Okay.
So, for whatever that's worth, but I mean, still, not like the Falcons where it's noticeably easy. I mean, and again, part of it is they're not a good team, so they're not going to be favored very well, maybe at all, as they go through the year there. So, I think we start there. I mentioned what you said there, which is this is basically a reboot. This is all new realistically. And yes, obviously they have some pieces there, but this is pretty much all new starting over. I don't know about the coach. I really don't here. And he was kind of that hot ticket, right? Like he kind of had that McVay vibe coming out of there. And it was
Baker Mayfield magic. I mean, what are you going to do?
He did. So, it's like he was kind of the hot guy, but I mean, essentially he's only, he hasn't proven much other than last year. And that worries me a little bit. Now he could end up being great. Who knows? We'll see. But I would say this. First of all, give the organization, because that organization has been a mess for the last few years, give them credit for at least trying to make this team better in the offseason. They brought in some guys, maybe not world beaters, but they brought in veterans on the offensive line. A guy like Robert Hunt, Austin Corbett, they brought in, veteran guys that are quality players to try and help Bryce Young. They tried to get him help at the receiver position, bringing Deontay Johnson in. They drafted Xavier Legette. So they're trying. And I think really, to me, this is kind of like, hey, we got to figure out what we got with Bryce Young here. Last year, probably not a fair assessment. Offensive line was bad. Didn't necessarily have great weapons there. So, now you beef up the offensive line. You give him some weapons there. He's got a year of experience. Can he take that step that gives them the faith that, hey, this can be our guy? Because to me, that's what this year is for Carolina. Is they're evaluating, right, where they're going, and they needed to bring in enough help, which I think they did, to at least get an accurate view of that. Now, did they bring in enough that even if Bryce Young takes that step, that they're going to be competitive? Probably not, at least competitive in the sense of fighting for the division. I mean, when you've got a Deontay Johnson, a rookie like Legette, and an Adam Thielen, I mean, you've got some tools there. They've got a deep backfield, but it's all a bunch of average guys, right? You got Miles Sanders, Sheba Hubbard. I think they brought Rashad Penny in.
Jonathan Brooks, they drafted.
Yeah, a bunch of guys, right? So there's a lot of guys there, but I think as a whole, that's kind of what you get with this team is you got a lot of guys, right? Deontay Johnson's quality, he's a guy. Adam Thielen at this stage, he's quality, he's a guy. I mentioned the offensive linemen that came in. They're guys, right? They're all it's kind of average. So is it enough for them to grade Bryce Young? I think so. And to me, again, that's got to be what their goal is this year. Is it enough to win football games? Probably not. I do like their defense, but I will tell you, when I look through, that defense there, it's one of the thinnest that you'll find, I think, in the entire league, meaning they got to stay healthy. If they get injuries on that defense, there's nothing behind these starters. And I think they've got some good starters on that defense. They got some guys that can play. They got some Pro Bowl guys like Derek Brown and, JC Horn potentially is a decent player, but there's nothing behind these guys. There really isn't. So I think they've got to stay healthy. And they, the other thing too is when I look at, I mentioned, I feel like they're trying to do the right things. They weren't great rushing the passer last year. They brought in a guy like Kayvon Chaisson to give them kind of a rotational third down rusher. They brought in Jadeveon Clowney, to give them a little bit of experience there. But I kind of like we said on the offense, it's just not enough. Like at this point, these are guys. So I just think at the end of the day, is this team going to be a little bit better than last year? Yeah, I think so. I think they will. And I think it will be very interesting to see. Is Bryce Young, do we get a glimpse of him that looks and says, this can be a guy, he can be a player that can take this team to the next level? Or is he going to be a first overall pick bust? That's what this season's about for me. When I look at it there, no chance they win the division, even though it's a bad division. I don't see that happening. Obviously a low win total. They're at 5.5. So you can look at that and say, maybe play the over. I wouldn't. I actually would lean under, because again, when you look at the games they're going to be favored in, it's going to be less than 6. So, I think if anything, this is probably a 4-13 type team. And, it's not that they didn't try. It's not that they might not be better. It's not that they play in a great division. All that said, they're just not very good. It's a very, very average to below average team that is kind of going to be, I think, kept in games by a defense if they're healthy.
Yeah, I like what you said about them trying to bring in enough to evaluate Bryce Young. It's hard to evaluate him off of last year. I was just going to say I don't really like Bryce Young very much. I suppose it's easy to say that after last year where he had very few weapons and honestly looked flat out bad a lot of the time. Not just not great, looked really bad. So I probably need to wait and see just a little bit. But I didn't even see many flashes that would make me think that there's something there. And he just needs to be surrounded by the right people. But who knows? Sophomore season, maybe there'll be a difference. Maybe Dave Canales can come in and work some Baker Mayfield magic on Bryce Young. Who knows? Yeah, I think their offense is okay. I mean, the pieces to me, it's like they lost some guys on the offensive line. They brought some guys in, and they're probably a little bit better, but are they significantly better? I'm not quite so sure.
Yeah.
On the offensive skill positions, I mean, Xavier Legette, we'll see. Again, I feel like with these rookies, you kind of have to wait and see. Deontay Johnson, I love how you just kept saying he's a guy. And I think you're right. That's so much of this team is Deontay Johnson is a good professional receiver. Not great. Adam Thielen, I think he surprised me last year. And I think surprised a lot of us with the production he was able to put out, getting a little ahead, but he's actually one where, depending on the number, I might be interested in an over on him once again. The injury there could be a concern, but I think he and Bryce Young had the most chemistry of any receiver on that team last year, and he still looked pretty good. And now they've got a little bit more help at receiver. I personally am also interested to see what Jonathan Brooks can do coming in from Texas. Maybe it's nothing. I mean, a lot of the reports where they want to get him a lot of the workload, and that could all be BS, and it's a new coaching staff, but I don't know that you're excited about Chuba Hubbard or Miles Sanders. Like, oh, we got to see what we have in those guys. I think if they're going to see what they have in Bryce Young, maybe they see what they have in a young guy like Jonathan Brooks as well. The defense, I think I'm not very high on this defense. I mean, they have some decent pieces, but people like Jadeveon Clowney at this point in his career just doesn't move the needle for me at all. I really don't care. And I feel like that's the case with a number of the people that they have there. The only place that isn't true for me is in the secondary. I think this is a pretty solid secondary. Yep. And I guess they have a couple of pieces up front, but I think this defense is going to struggle again because the offense is going to put them in bad positions. And I think things are going to roll against them a lot. When I look at the schedule, I mean, of course they could win any game, and they will win some game that they're really not supposed to. They will win some game. But when I look at the games that I think, okay, you're probably in this, the Chargers, at the Raiders, at the Commanders, at the Broncos. They get the Giants at home, but a lot of these games that I think they should be in are on the road. They do get Arizona at home too, but I'll be honest, man, you talk to me about Arizona and the Panthers, and I'm like, I don't think the Panthers are a better team than the Cardinals. Like, even in Carolina, I would probably favor Arizona. So all that to say, oh, the one other thing again on the turnover thing, they -9 turnover differential, but the big thing for me, they were -3.75 wins over expectation. So they were even worse than they should have been, based purely on turnovers. So I haven't bet it yet, but I like to have these conversations first. But I like the under at plus money here. Yes, 5 wins is a low number. It absolutely is. And they could get to 6. I think 7 would be the absolute ceiling for this team. But if I think that their range is like 2 to 7, plus money under 5.5 doesn't seem too bad to me.
No, I'm with you. I think the under is the play here if you're going to play this.
Yep. Anything for you on players on this team?
No, there's really nothing that you can look at here. I mean, I toyed again, if you wanted to get cute, with a Bryce Young over on yardage. It's a low number, at 3150, which, compared to most starting quarterbacks in the league is low. You figure he has more weapons this year. They're probably going to be trailing in games, but I can't get there. I mean, I'm not gonna put real money out there on something like that.
Yeah, agree. I definitely would not be betting. If I was going to bet anything on Bryce Young, I'd have to take an under just out of principle, but probably just leave that one alone.
So. Right.
All right. Well, from there, I think the next 2 teams, it's at least kind of interesting because when you look at this, the Falcons are understandably the favorite. The Panthers are understandably the basement dweller. I think these next 2 teams are ones that, the Saints, that we'll get to next, were expected to be the top of the division last year, and a team that hasn't changed a ton. We'll talk through that. And then the Bucs, who people thought wouldn't be very good, myself included, and then it ended up winning the division, even though it wasn't a strong division. So I think some interesting stuff to talk through with these 2 teams. The Saints, still coached by Dennis Allen, much to the chagrin of some Saints fans, I'm sure. 9-8 last year. They lost the division via a tiebreak. I have their strength of schedule as 26th, so I have them also as a more difficult schedule. Yanni, when you look at the Saints this year, they were supposed to be the top of the division last year. Is this a team that can play in that realm this year?
They can. I think that it's definitely doable, and I think they're roughly plus 400, plus 425 to win the division.
I am dropping the ball tonight. I have it right here. Let me pull it up. So yeah, over under 7.5, -110 to the, so basically even money, and 370 plus 375 to win the division.
425, right? So I think that shows that it's doable, right? It's not. I think that when Vegas looks at that, they're saying, this team could be competitive in this division here. And I think they could, because, again, you rewind a year ago, this is essentially the same team that was favored to win this division. Now, obviously, people may not have thought the Falcons would be as good a year ago as maybe people think they'll be this year. But when you look at the Saints, here's the most positive thing that I think they have going for them. The quarterback position towards the second half of the season finally started to come around a little bit. That first half of the season, Derek Carr did not look good at all. And that looked like a horrendous move for that team. Now, even in the second half, he wasn't exactly killing it, but he definitely looked better. So I think that if I'm a Saints fan, if I'm trying to be optimistic, I'm looking at that and saying, okay, we got a little bit of offensive momentum going later in the season. So, maybe that's something to build on. Maybe they can get there. You mentioned Dennis Allen. I don't like this coaching staff at all. And I think it really holds them back. It's like, as a casual fan, we watch these games, and I understand, without getting too detailed, I understand when you have a guy like Taysom Hill, it's a gadget thing, right? You can't play him every snap. You can't hand it to him I get that. But when you watch this team last year, when he's in the game, they move the ball. he isn't in the game a lot. And, it's sitting there like, put him in there, get him in there. Like, why is he not in there more? They paid him all this money. If you're going to pay him this money, you better get your money's worth and utilize him. So again, not high on the coaching staff, but rewinding back, I think that, you can look at that improved quarterback play down the stretch and say, okay, maybe they've got something there. We know Olave is a quality receiver there as a wide receiver one. That's a nice piece. I don't know what's going on with Alvin Kamara. I mean, there seems to be more rumbling. Who knows? They do have Jamal Williams. They do have a little bit there. So it's not necessarily, and I don't think we're talking about the Alvin Kamara of, 4 or 5 years ago either. So it's not, depending upon what his situation is, I don't think it's like do or die. But what I do like is they reinvested in the offensive line. And when they were chucking along with Drew Brees, they put an emphasis on that offensive line. And, when you look at it on paper, it's not bad. Now, they underperformed as an offensive line last year, big time. They need to play better, but they drafted a left tackle in the first round. Of course, he's a rookie. We don't know how that's going to play out, but I mean, they're trying to build the right way. This team's been in salary cap hell for the last 2 or 3 years, and they've kind of been kicking the can down the road, as I think is the expression that those cap guys like to use. They've done as well as they can, I think, as far as drafting, by bringing in a first-round left tackle. They drafted our guy Kool-Aid from Alabama there to play in the secondary, to give them some depth behind Lattimore, who's been hurt, and Paulson, who's a quality guy there. So, I think that they're, again, kind of like the Panthers. I think they're kind of trying to do the right things. The question is, will it be enough? I mean, I think, to me, here's the concern I have on the offensive side of the ball. After Olave, I don't love the rest of the weapons to throw the ball to. Now, let me preface that by saying I think Rashid Shaheed is awesome, but I think he's kind of that, stretch the field, that third receiver kind of thing. I mean, he's essentially going to have to play wide receiver too in this offense, and I don't know that he's cut out to be an every down type player. I think his value is he gets in there and he blows by people and he gets open and all that stuff. We've seen a lot of teams that take that guy and try to make him an every down player, and it doesn't work. So I don't know if we're going to get the same electricity out of Rashid Shaheed that we got a year ago, even though he's very talented. But, you kind of look at the rest of the receivers. It's like, who is A.T. Perry? I mean, he's going to be your WR3. Equinemius St. Brown, you're going to roll him out at wide receiver 3. Like, these guys aren't good. What if Olave goes down in this offense? Like, all of a sudden, you got nothing out there, man. So that worries me a lot, as far as the receivers go. To me, it all comes down to the coaching, though. Can they evolve? Their offense with so vanilla. Put Taysom Hill in there, run some creative things, get Shaheed the ball in space. If Kamara's out there, get Kamara the ball in space. I mean, I swear it was like up the middle, Kamara 3 yards, right? It was like slant Olave. I mean, it was just so unimaginative when you watched them last year. So they definitely need to do better there. On the defensive side of the ball, here's where I am with them. It's not a horrible defense, I don't think, but their big names are getting pretty old. When you look at like Demario Davis and obviously Cam Jordan, it's like, how much are you going to get out of guys like that? They brought over guys like a Chase Young. I mean, we're going to find out if Chase Young is a bust or not here. I mean, I think at this point, everybody's leaning towards a yes. Yeah. I'm going to give him a shot to say maybe he's going to come in. He'll get a rotational defensive end, role. Maybe he can make some plays. But I don't want to bank on that, when I look at that. So I do think the secondary I mentioned, I think their corners are good there. I think they could be solid there. So I think they're, potentially they're good. But again, kind of like the Panthers, not a ton of depth here, in my opinion, on that defense there. And I don't know that they have like that elite rusher at this point. They have guys. Granderson can rush the quarterback a little bit. Cam Jordan, we know throughout his career, can get there. I mentioned Chase Young, but can any of those guys be that elite, 12, 13, 14 sack guy that you can count on 3rd and 8 to really get after the quarterback? I don't know. And without a pass rush, they're really going to have to lean on those corners. So I look at this team that was kind of a long way of saying what you started with, which is this team is what they were a year ago, realistically there. How much of improvement they get out of Derek Carr and how much their coaching changes to me impact what goes on with this team. But much like much like the Falcons, the Saints were 6-11 against the spread last year. They were overvalued too. And a lot of that was early in the year because, again, Derek Carr sucked. And I think people are like, oh, you got the Saints team and now they got a quarterback. And, we'll see. I do like their over. I don't have their schedule as hard as you do. I have them at 22nd. So, not quite as hard as you have them there. When I look at that, they're 7.5. When I look at their schedule, I think there's 9 or 10 winnable games. Now, do I think they necessarily get to 9 or 10 wins? I don't know, but I definitely think they can get to 8. And I think, 8 to 9 is kind of that area I have them there. So I don't hate them. And I'll be honest with you, I won't bet it, but at plus 425, which is what Bovada has right now for them to win the division, I don't think it's horrible because if Kirk Cousins goes down, if Drake London goes down, like somebody could end up taking this division. And if the Saints stay healthy on the flip side, it could absolutely be them. If you're getting plus 425 or better, I mean, I don't hate that.
Yeah, I don't hate that either. That's a really good line. I don't, Bovada's not one of the ones I check, but maybe it should be because that's really good. Yeah, I think we're mostly aligned here, and we're a little closer on that strength of schedule, a few spots off. But I wasn't a huge Jameis Winston fan or anything, but I think not having much of anything behind Derek Carr now. I mean, you've got Spencer Rattler. It could potentially be problematic because Derek Carr can become a bit of a head case. Derek Carr is a weird guy to me because I think there are times, especially if things are rolling okay, he actually provides some leadership and I think can be a decent quarterback. But then when things start to go wrong, it's like they go really wrong and he kind of implodes and blows things up.
He's bipolar, man. He's bipolar.
He is. Yeah. He's the kind of guy where if they got on a little bit of a win streak, you could see him just like carrying them forward, and being this pretty good leader. So I think what you said about the coaching staff is interesting. And I'm not going to pretend right now like I know much of anything about Clint Kubiak, who they brought in as offensive coordinator this year. What I know is that he's coming from San Francisco, and he was a passing game specialist there. Was he able to learn from Kyle Shanahan? Is he? I mean, that's a creative offense. And you talked about Taysom Hill, working him in. You talked about not having a number 2 receiver, which I think is pretty true, though. At first, I was a little offended because I love Shaheed too. So I like what you said about him.
I love Shaheed, man. I do. Yeah. I do.
I think Jawan Johnson is another decent receiver at tight end. Probably not a number 2, but they have a few weapons there. I think what you said about if Olave goes down, they're hurting. Totally agree with that. I don't know what we're getting from Alvin Kamara. They have average or at best running backs behind him. So, man, it's just one of these that feels iffy to me because I actually overall with the Saints, I despite all this stuff I'm saying, I kind of like them. I think that their defense is pretty solid across the board. I do think that they're not deep, like you said, so they're not going to be able to sustain a lot of injuries. But I think that it at least has the potential to be a well-balanced team, a good offense, a good defense that can put together a well-rounded game in a division where, we just talked about the weakness of the Falcons, that they've got a great offense. Well, if their defense can just slow them down a little bit and then the Falcons don't have much resistance on defense, maybe they can do something. But then it all just feels a little bit flimsy too. So I'm with you. I actually have them projected for 8.24 wins. So that would be over the 7.5. And I will save what I bet for the division until after we talk about the Bucs, but it does involve the Saints as well. So this is a team, I think actually, if I'm honest, part of what I like about the Saints is we were not you and I necessarily, I don't actually remember at this point, but generally the sentiment was so positive toward them going into last year.
Yep.
And then it all fell apart. And I think I have this propensity in me, but certainly the market has it, and fans have it, to overreact a ton. And I said it, you said it, this is basically the same team. So are they as good as we thought they'd be going into last year? Maybe not. Are they as bad as what everybody thinks they were after a disappointing finish to the season, or end of the season last year? I think maybe not. Like, I think this is probably an average team that, to your point, at something like plus 425 certainly has a chance. I mean, I have their percentage to win the division at 23%, and 425 is going to be better than what I have, and that was already a little bit of an edge even at plus 375. So I have that as a decent bet to win the division. Any player props for you that are of interest on this one?
I think when I look at potential, player props here, it's kind of in the same vein as what we said with both the Falcons and Drake London. I think Chris Olave's over is very much in play. It's at 1,025 yards. So it's only 75 more yards than London. Olave has been a much more productive receiver than London, since they came in. But again, we kind of mentioned that lack of a true number 2 wide receiver there. And I think that only benefits Olave. So, is there any way he isn't 1,000-yard receiver if he's healthy? It sure doesn't seem like it. So, I mean, if you want to bet an over, again, you're basically betting on him to stay healthy. But I think as long as he does that's pretty much a sure shot going over if he plays 16, 17 games.
Do you have a number on Alvin Kamara? His rushing yards?
Yeah, his rushing yards was low. It was like 525, I think, or maybe 6. It might have been 625.
Okay.
But I think, they're sensing, because let's put it this way. If he plays the season, he'll go over that. I mean,
he should. Right.
But, I think what they're banking on is there's these issues, and he's probably going to not be playing, or whatever's going to happen there. So, I mean, you could certainly take an under there and roll the dice.
Yeah. Yeah. He doesn't play, or if he really is kind of washed. I mean, he looked pretty bad last year, and it could have been injuries, right? That's what we don't know. It could have been injuries. He comes back looking better this year, but also running backs tend to expire.
Oh yeah.
They hit the end and then they're just done. And there are some exceptions to that, but he may also just be done.
Yeah. Yep.
All right. Well, that is the Saints. Let's move on to the division winner from last year, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. Todd Bowles coming back. You can't fire a division winner, so he's back. They do have a new offensive coordinator. Last year went 9-8, as I already mentioned, won the division via tiebreak. I have their strength of schedule at 22nd in the league this year. Yanni, is this team, Baker Mayfield, going to lead them to a repeat division championship?
Oh man, I am so torn on this Tampa Bay team, and I'm going to tell you why. I'll explain why. So when I break this team down, I like it. I really like this team. But what have we seen from Baker Mayfield throughout his NFL career? He pops up, he does amazing, and then he disappears. And, it's like, are we going to get that with Baker Mayfield? He popped up, he played great last year, he got paid. What now? We have yet to see him essentially play extended ball, a good football for a long period of time, right? He came out like a cannon with Cleveland. We all know what he did in that game with the Rams and those couple games with the Rams that he played, came into Tampa and did it. But is it going to stick? I mean, that's so hard to know at this point because his track record says, no, it's not. But he is older. He's more mature. He's, seems to be comfortable. He seems to be in a situation where his teammates like him and, he's the, kind of unquestioned leader there. So we'll see on that. I mean, there's a lot of other questions though, too, when you look at this team. And I mean, part of it goes to his weapons. He's got 2 great players in Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. Mike Evans was drafted in 2013. That was a long time ago now for a wide receiver in the NFL. Godwin, I think, was drafted in 2017, maybe. So, he's starting to get up there. And he actually looks like, last year, like he had lost a little bit of a step there, maybe more than Evans. So, you look at that and you say, gosh, man, these guys are hard to defend, Evans and Godwin. Is that going to be the case? Because just like you said with Alvin Kamara, these skill positions, they have a shelf life. They absolutely do. And a lot of times, those running backs and receivers, when they fall fast. When that step goes, it goes. So that's a question mark. Now, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt because Evans looked good last year. Godwin still contributed, even though he did look a little slower, in my opinion. But I like what they did in the draft. They kind of, much like I said with the Saints, they drafted an offensive lineman early there. I think that's a good thing. When you look at that offensive line, when it's healthy, it looks pretty good. Now, they don't have a ton of depth on their offensive line either. And, they need to play a little bit better overall, I think, too. But they've kind of fought through injuries and they were shuffling some bodies around last year. You can't necessarily fault them for that. I mean, that's part of the game. If they can stay healthy, I think this can be a pretty good offensive line. That'll obviously help Mayfield if he's got protection there. I like their running game. I don't love it. I think that it's capable. I don't think it's going to blow anybody away. I mean, Rachaad White played well at the end of the year. He was catching the ball well. But I mean, he's not exactly going to be Barry Sanders out there. I don't necessarily love their depth. I know they drafted a couple guys. They have Chase Edmonds, but realistically, kind of like we were saying about the Panthers, those are just guys, right? They're just kind of there. They're okay. When we flip to the defensive side of the ball, they're going to be good against the run. And normally this Tampa Bay team is. Obviously with Vita Vea there, last year's draft pick, Elijah Cansey. I mean, they're going to be good there. They're stout up the middle. They brought Levante David back, who's still playing at a decent level. Been a good player for a long time. And they're really good at the safety position there with Jordan Whitehead and Antoine Winfield. So I don't think you're going to necessarily run the ball against this team. However, you might be able to throw the ball real well against this team because I don't see the pass rush here, the consistent pass rush here, and I don't like their corners at all. The pass rush, they've got Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. He's kind of a guy that stepped up a little bit, but I don't think he's an elite type of guy. I know they drafted him in the first round a few years ago. I think, again, he's just kind of a decent edge rusher there. I mean, I think they got Logan Hall that they'll, put out there. William Golston's there. Speaking of a guy that was drafted 100 years ago, I feel like he's been there forever. So they've got guys, but again, they're guys. They're not all-stars. They're not all pros. If you can't get home and your cornerbacks are Jamel Dean, he's your number one corner, and you look at what they got behind him there, I'm not liking that. I mean, Zion McCollum is their number two corner, at least on the depth chart right now, and there's really not much behind there. I have a feeling that this team is going to get thrown on a lot. And yes, you may not be able to run against them, but it may not matter. I mean, you can use short passes, and you may be able to chunk this team. So when I look at this team, I've got questions on the defensive side of the ball in the passing defense. And then on the offensive side, I've got questions with, new offensive coordinator and a quarterback who hasn't been able to prove it. So these are big questions. But with all that being said, I like this Tampa Bay team. I'm probably going to end up regretting this. This is probably going to be one of those clips where it's like, man, remember when he said he liked Tampa Bay and they went 4-13? It could happen, right? If Baker Mayfield chokes it up or, whatever, maybe Evans and Godwin just don't have it anymore. Because, again, they don't have a whole lot of depth at receiver behind Evans and Godwin. It's not like they are chock full of young guys waiting in the wings behind them there. I don't think they are. So there are definitely a lot of question marks on this team. But I think they're going to be feisty, and I think they're going to be in these games that they play. So much like the Saints, I think they're right there with the Falcons. I mean, I think they're going to compete with them in this division. I really do. So I essentially, now that we've covered all four, to me, it's like a three-way logjam towards the top there. I think that all three of these teams are going to be in that like 8 to 10 win window there. And it might be the matter of who stays healthiest, who gets luckiest, could be the schedule. We mentioned the Falcons obviously having the benefit of the easiest schedule, but I like this Bucs team. I could be crazy. We talked about the overs with the Falcons. I think this is another team that we could look at because, again, I don't think people are even going to try to run on this Bucs team. I think they're going to throw. Obviously, we know the Bucs are going to have to do the same on the other end. There could be a lot of points in these games. Especially early in the season here. So that's kind of my quick breakdown on Tampa. Over 7.5. Give me the over.
Okay. I don't know what you have. I have it at minus 145 to the over 7.5. So definitely juice that way. And I had 310 for them to win the division.
Yep.
Okay. Man, I feel like I don't have a lot to say on this team. They are another team that feel very similar to last year to me, and you kind of nailed the question mark. And I think they're the same question marks as last year. Are Mike Evans and Chris Godwin getting old? Can Baker Mayfield play at a high level? Which I'll be the first to say, going into last year, I did not think he could for a whole season. So he proved me wrong last year, without a doubt. if I had to bet, I'm going to bet he's not going to be awesome this year. Maybe he'll go out and prove me wrong again. It's like you said, we've seen him spike up, spike down, but hey, maybe he's really grown into it and he's figured out how to play. And, he's not going to be the best quarterback in the league, but maybe he's found a way to be steady and good. If he has, Tampa Bay should be a decent team. I'm not, outside of Mike Evans, I'm not pumped anywhere, and he's getting older, so I don't know how pumped to be about him.
Right.
So I'm not really pumped about any of their weapons. I'm not pumped about their offensive line. I think it's fine. I don't mean that it's bad. I think it's fine. Their defense feels very similar. I think this is what I said last year, though. I'm getting old and my memory's not great, so I could be totally wrong. But what it feels like to me on the defense is you can point to quite a few positions and be like, ooh, that's good. Vita Vea in the middle. Oh, that's good. Antoine Winfield Jr. holding down the back end. Absolutely. They have some awesome pieces and they have some holes.
Yeah.
And you talked about the holes. And I think in the NFL, I think it's problematic to have holes. I said something like this last week, but I think you almost would rather just be solid across the board, even if you don't have any superstars, than to have a few superstars, but then have holes other places, because NFL teams know how to exploit that. So I think their defense is going to run into some problems this year. They'll probably make some big plays and have some good games too. They'll end up being average most likely. So I just look at this team and go, average is what it seems like to me. Now they do have some upside, to your point. If Mike Evans can be Mike Evans still, if Baker Mayfield plays well again, if this offensive line can stay healthy, if they can figure out how to shore up the secondary a little bit. It's a lot of ifs, but it could be okay. And I agree with you about the 3-team race. So for me, to get to the bet that I've made, and I don't know if I feel absolutely amazing about it, but I feel okay about it still. I do like the Falcons to win this division. If Kirk Cousins goes down, I think it's problematic. And we talked about not liking the defense. But with that schedule, man, I like them to pull out the division. I like them to win 10 or 11 games, and Tampa and New Orleans to be at that 7, 8, 9 range. So I bet Atlanta, Tampa Bay straight forecast at plus 330, and Atlanta, New Orleans straight forecast at plus 380. So basically what it does is it's giving me anywhere between like plus 105 and plus 120 on Atlanta to win the division is the way I look at it, instead of getting minus 115.
Yep.
So that's a division bet that I made. No sure things. Absolutely. The Saints and Bucks both can hang around, but I do like Atlanta to ultimately win the division here.
I can't argue with you. Can't argue.
You can.
I mean, if you want to, die on the hill that Baker Mayfield and Derek Carr are going to take the division, to me, if we're going to go through and pick this, I feel like the schedule, you have to take the Falcons. I mean, like you said, it is such a soft schedule. If they don't win this division, yeah. It's obviously one of the weaker divisions in the league. Their schedule as a whole is simple, and they definitely, I think, have the most talent top to bottom, in the division. So it's like they absolutely should. I mean, I like what you have with the forecast there and, basically improving your odds there to get them to win it. I don't know that I will, just because, again, I see these 3 teams very close. I just think that there is a chance that Atlanta goes 13-4 and these other teams go, 8-9 or 7-10. Absolutely. It could happen. But I just have a feeling that, as we get to the midway point, these teams are all going to be, 5-3, 4-4, and they're all just going to kind of be there in a pile and going to kind of roll through the season that way.
Yeah, to your point, one other thing you could look at if you want to try to play this in a smart way is Atlanta's hardest part of their whole season is the first 3 weeks. They have Pittsburgh at home. We'll get to Pittsburgh. I don't know where you're at on them. I don't think they're great, but they'll be okay.
Yep.
Then they have to go to Philly, and then Kansas City comes to town. That's tough.
Yep.
Then it's New Orleans, Tampa Bay, Carolina, Seattle at home. The other game that's tough is they get Dallas, but they get Dallas at home.
Yep.
Denver, the Chargers, Minnesota, the Raiders, the Giants, the Commanders. I mean, like from that game on, it is just not tough.
So what you're saying is wait a few weeks and play the future. Yeah.
You could.
Yeah.
Because they could definitely be 1-2 or 0-3 after those first 3 weeks and still end up with 11 wins.
Yep.
So, I think that would be an interesting way to play it.
Yeah. Yep. I agree.
All right. Well, as we've been doing, we're going to rank some stuff here. Before we do, please like the video, subscribe to the channel. Also, drop a comment. Let us know what you think. Who's going to win this division? Is Atlanta going to be able to take it? Is it Tampa Bay or New Orleans? Hey, if you want to be that person that says Carolina's going to win the division and the 1 out of 100 times they do, you can come back and say, see, I put it in the comments. By all means, feel free to do it. Also, you can follow Yanni at Yanni_bet on X and get a lot of the content at the Bet Crushers on X. You can follow me at Big Tasty Sports. Go there and you can get all the stuff from our websites and different things. As we get closer to the year, I'm sure there will be more and more stuff coming out. Yanni does probably some of the best write-ups on these teams and divisions that you will find anywhere going into the season. So make sure you follow him so that you can get all that stuff. All right, Yanni. Let's go ahead and start out with ranking these coaches, which, again, is going to be a different exercise than the NFC North was last week.
Oh, man. Remember how we said not good? Like, not good. I literally kind of went through it. I'm like, oh, man, how am I going to do this? And I went back and forth. Here's what I settled on. And let me just tell you, I don't like any of these guys, going into the season. Yep. Obviously, there is an unknown with Dave Canales. So, I mean, he could end up being great, maybe, but at least going into the season, we don't know that. But here's where I landed. I went with Raheem Morris first. When you look back at what he's done in the NFL, like there's been more good than bad. He seems to be the guy that players really want to rally around, really want to play for. And he also has the benefit of walking into a good situation that, had horrible coaching. So I think that, I'm going to put him first, which I know that seems crazy, but that's where I'm at, So I went with that. I went with Todd Bowles second. And look, I don't think Todd Bowles is a very good head coach. I really don't. But he's been to the playoffs. I mean, he had a guy named Tom Brady, which helped, that kind of a thing, inherited a pretty good team. But, Bowles does kind of know defense. I think he's a generally smart guy. I don't know that he's the best motivator. I don't know that he's, whatever. I think he needs help like a good offensive coordinator in that. But I've got him second. And then I put Canales third, even though, we don't know what we're getting from him, based strictly off the fact that he did a nice job with Baker Mayfield and his offensive coordinator. And I've got Dennis Allen last because, quite frankly, I think he's a terrible head coach. I just do. There's nothing about him, even when he got that job. And I know their defense was pretty good when he was defensive coordinator, but there was nothing about him that made me believe he should have ever gotten that job. And he's done even less to prove it since he's had that job. I mean, to me, Dennis Allen gets less out of more than, anybody in the league. So, I've got him dead last there. And I mean, that's hard to do, putting Raheem Morris and Todd Bowles 1 and 2 in a division coaching, but that's the NFC South, man. I mean, this is why these teams will not be in the Super Bowl. I mean, I honestly, like, not just coaching, obviously, but this is why these teams are not very good. It starts at the top.
Yeah. I will start by saying, I think that I would take every coach in the NFC North over all 4 of these, including Matt Eberflus, who I'm not super high on, but I'd still take him over these 4.
I think I would too. Eberflus would be the only one that maybe, but yeah, I think even he would probably get the nod here. Yeah.
Yeah. So I went a little bit different order. And I again went back to what we've talked about of, if I had to pick someone to coach the Vikings, who am I going with? I went Dave Canales first.
Yeah.
And I just went, I don't like any of these other guys. He may suck, but maybe he doesn't. Yep. So fair. I put him first in that sense. I had Todd Bowles second, sort of that, he's steady. I guess. Raheem Morris third, and Dennis Allen DF last. Same thing. I mean, if we're ranking coaches in the whole NFL, he's going to be
towards the bottom.
certainly in the running for
Yep.
last in that, not just in this one.
Yep.
All right. Next up, let's rate the offenses.
Okay, so this one was the first one. Obviously, I think we're probably going to be in agreement with is the Falcons. I mean, on paper, this offense can be really, really good. Now we'll see if it transpires. But you've got the best quarterback. You've got potentially a game-changing tight end. You got a good offensive line. You got great potential running backs there. So to me, the Falcons are clearly number one here. Second, it was tough. I took the Bucs second. And that was mainly because of the Evans Godwin thing, which we've already talked about is a little bit questionable there. And at least based on last year, the second best quarterback in the division would be Baker Mayfield. Now, it's not to say he will be this year, but based on last year, I had the Saints just a notch behind them there. I think the Saints offense can be good, but again, they're going to need Clint Kubiak to come in and do some things there. As you mentioned, we need that creativity. We need to see Taysom Hill on the field. We need to see guys like Rashid Shaheed get the ball in creative ways. And then I've got the Panthers last, and I mean, it's really just an indictment on their offensive line and Bryce Young, and the fact that, kind of like we mentioned, they've got some guys now, but they're just guys. So I think, they've got to prove it. I mean, I still think they should be a little better than they were last year, I would hope, but can you see this team putting 30 points up? I mean, it doesn't seem like it still seems like it's going to be a struggle for them to move the chains consistently.
I think they might be able to put 30 points up if they get 4 pick sixes in a game.
I was going to say maybe if, you get a couple defensive scores, maybe. Yeah.
Yeah, Yanni, we're the same on this one. Atlanta, to me, clear-cut number one offensively, especially with Cousins healthy. Yep. Tampa Bay, I think I have Tampa Bay a notch above New Orleans, and then Carolina is pretty far in the back of the pack for me offensively. So we're on the same page with those.
I'll tell you, though, for me, I had the Bucs and the Saints very close. Like I kind of, looked back and forth there a few times before settling on the Bucs, ahead. But I could definitely see the Saints at the end of the day being ahead of Tampa. It's possible, I think.
Yeah, I think what you mentioned and we've talked about is there going to be creativity offensively in New Orleans? Because they have some interesting Shaheed and Taysom Hill are pieces you can do creative stuff with. So
for sure.
That could turn the tide for them. All right, let's flip to the defenses and see if we get some disagreement there.
We may, because I struggled with the defenses here. I actually went with the Saints number one, and I know that this defense is aging. I kind of mentioned they don't necessarily have great pass rush, great whatever, but I think overall, I think their starting 11 and probably their next 2 or 3 guys are all pretty good, and that's kind of hoping that Demario Davis and Cam Jordan still have a little bit left in the tank, guys like that. But I think this defense is pretty solid. They rarely get run over or just torched. I mean, and that was with some guys injured and beat up last year. So I think, you get these guys healthy. I kind of mentioned the depth they have in the secondary. I think this will be a pretty good defense. I went with the Panthers number 2, actually, on defense here. I think, when you look back at that team last year, and you touched on it earlier, that offense puts them in horrible, horrible spots, right? I mean, it would suck to play defense for that team, but they kind of, kept them most games from being completely blown out. There were a lot of those games where in the fourth quarter it was 20-7 or, whatever. They were kind of holding it somewhat close. I like their starting 11. I really do. Now, I mentioned it. I think they have zero depth on that defense. So to me, that's the type of defense that could get bad really quickly if they get substantial injuries. But if they can stay healthy, I think they're top 11. I think their starters are pretty good. And then I went with the Bucs third. Kind of like we mentioned, I like the fact that they can stop the run. I like their safeties. But we also, you kind of touched on it. There's some glaring holes in that defense too, in that secondary and potentially with the pass rush and that could be a problem. And then I went with the Falcons last. I just think that, even though they were better last year, they were still average. They weren't great. Right. And I just think there's going to be some regression there. I think that, when you look at that lineup top to bottom, it's just not that great. I mean, so yeah, they, again, kind of like the Bucs, they got a couple nice pieces of guys that you would have there. But overall, I think that defense could be a problem for them. I think, we could see a little bit of that assuming Cousins is healthy, that Cousins of your Vikings from 2 years ago when they were lighting the scoreboard up, but the defense couldn't stop anybody. I think we could see a little bit of that in Atlanta.
Yeah, I completely agree. That's a good connection. I think it could be a lot like that season was. Yeah, I had New Orleans first also. I like them most across the board. I actually put Tampa Bay second. I feel a little bit lower on Carolina's defense, I think, than you do, though. I had Carolina barely third, I would say. I just don't like them losing Frankie Louvu and Brian Burns. Those are two really good pieces
losses,
that I think it's just hard to replace even with decent guys. So, but I wouldn't argue much with it. I don't have big disparity between those, and I have Atlanta last as well. Yeah, you said it. I don't even know that there's a lot of debate that it's the least talented defense in the division. So,
yeah, I think so.
All right, well let's rate what is the finishing order in the NFC South this year, Yanni.
I'm with you. I mean, something always makes me hesitant with this Falcons team. And I think, like we said, it's because the last 5 or 6 years they've gone under their win total. They're horrible against the spread. They always seem to blow big games, whatever. But I think you got to take the Falcons just on the fact that their schedule is so freaking soft. I don't even think they have to play great and they should be able to win this division. So I'm going to go Falcons, taking the division there. I really went back and forth between the Bucs and Saints, kind of, much like I did on the offenses and defenses too. But I went with the Saints second, and I kind of went back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is a year ago, we thought the same Saints team was going to win the division. So I kind of went off that philosophy there, and the fact that, as crazy as it sounds, I trust the little bit of momentum that Derek Carr and that offense had towards the end of last season more than I trust Baker Mayfield to repeat as a good NFL quarterback. I if he does, great. And hopefully he will. I think he's probably a good dude, whatever, all that. But I think I'm going to give the slight edge to the Saints there. I'll go the Bucs third. And then, of course, Panthers, I think, are still a distant fourth. I mean, kind of like I said, I see those top 3 teams in that 8 to 10 win range, and I see the Panthers in that 4 to 5 win range.
Yeah, I was the same order. Falcons, Saints by the third tiebreaker over the Bucs for second, and then Panthers, I think a relatively distant third again. Yeah. Or fourth, sorry, not third. I was putting the Bucs and the Saints in second there for a second.
Yeah.
So, yep, same. All right, last thing before we get out of here, Yanni, anything that you would say is a best bet for you in this? I mean, it can be more than one thing, but things.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the stuff we've talked about, I wouldn't say they're necessarily best bets, but I think, the Falcons winning the division or how you have them played, something like that. I think, again, they would have to just monumentally stink to not take this. And I mean, is it possible? Sure. But I think that's there. I know the player props I mentioned with the receivers with London and Olave. I like both of those. And again, if you want to play NFL future player props over, not always a good idea, but I think those numbers are too low for those. I mean, those guys, if they play the season, are clearly 1,000-yard receivers. I mean, clearly, when you kind of look at that. So I like them there. I like the Panthers under that 5.5. And again, low number, I get it, but I struggle to see them winning more than 4, maybe 5 games max. I mean, I think this is a 3, 4, 5 win team. So I think all of those are out there. And, I think I feel like, and correct me if I'm wrong, the last handful of years when we've looked at these low unders going in, they've almost all stayed under. I mean, when you get these 4.5, 5.5 wins, there's a reason for it, and they almost all stay under. I mean, I think people look at those and they're like, oh yeah, Panthers brought some guys in, 6 wins, sure, that they can do that. And it's like, I don't know, man. I don't know. So I'm going the other way.
They still have to beat other NFL teams.
Right.
Better than they are.
Right. Hopefully Deontay Johnson will get them to 10 wins. I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, right. Yeah. He'll drop enough passes to not do that. Right. We didn't talk about the dropsies. Yeah. I think you said a lot of them there, Yanni. I think the Panthers under 5.5 at plus money is my favorite bet in the division. I really like the Drake London over. I like it even more than the Olave one just because there are some other okay options in Atlanta, and I think they're going to be able to run the ball, which gives him more opportunity. and Cousins can just light it up in that situation. So I do like that Drake London over. And then obviously I like, the way that I played the Falcons to win the division, at least getting plus money. I like that better than laying minus 115. But I like that fine. The other one that I'll say, which I'm not going to bet because what I've already done, but if you can get the Saints at plus 425 and you see these holes with the Falcons and don't necessarily want to bet the Falcons, I think the Saints have a better chance to win the division than what the line of plus 425 says.
Totally agree.
So I don't hate that bet if someone wants to take a shot on it either.
Yeah, to me, that number is way long. I'm with you on that. When I saw that, to me, like, these teams are not that drastically different. And if it weren't for that soft schedule of Atlanta, which we keep bringing up, I think you could absolutely hammer the Saints on that and take a shot. I mean, to your point, I don't know if I'll bet it just because it seems like the Falcons are going to cruise there, but man, 425, I don't know, man, that just seems a little wild.
I agree. And this is one of those places, Yanni, I've been wrestling with this because I've been, and you can check out the video if you haven't yet. I did some season simulations and some of the percentages that came back. I look at bets and I go, okay, do I think that this is going to win? No. Do I think the Saints are going to win the division? No, I don't. Do I think the Saints have a better than the implied probability of 425 is what, like 19% or something like that? 18.5. Do I think they have a better chance than 18.5% to win the division? Yeah, I do.
They do.
So this is one of those things where it depends how you want to bet. If you want to bet on things that you're like, I think this is going to happen, probably not the bet for you. But if you're one of those guys that's like, hey, when there's a better chance of it happening than what the line says, and you want to make those bets, I think this is a good bet in that case.
Yeah. Well stated. Completely agree.
Yeah. All right, man. NFC down. Next up, we'll move to the AFC, and before long, we will be landing in Buffalo to talk about your Bills, Yanni.
Hey, looking forward to that. NFC was fun, man.
Yeah, it was fun. Thanks again for doing it, and we'll be back with another one in the next week or two.
Sounds good. Thanks for having me.